Hey, everybody, welcome back. It's a great time for us to start season 3. It's Halloween. So, for all those people who are celebrating, happy Halloween. For all my other metaphysicists, happy Samhain. I know this is a very exciting time for us. This is our third season getting into Small Talk is Lame. And as you guys, if you guys don't know me, I'm Brandon, and this is.
Sierra.
And this is still. Yeah, a platform where we talk about all the things around community, well, now community, connection and conversations, and how digital distance cannot be the deterrent to make strong bonds, connections, and impacts in your everyday life among friends, family, and otherwise. So yeah. I think it's really interesting. Like when we were talking about trying to create the idea around season 3, we were both like community.
Oh yeah.
I think that's the thing. Yeah, because I think the last couple seasons we've really talked about individuality and how it's important to be a advocate for connecting. But now I was like, well, how can we expand that? I think we were like, well, what do people do that already exist in groups? Do they still talk in a way that's boring and non-connective, or are they just relying on their digital platforms and digital communities to do that? And so I was like, well, this is a good topic for us to kind of talk about. So.
But something that was super interesting, because for the viewers who don't know, like there was probably a little bit of a content delay when it came to around September. But Brandon and I have been talking about what this next season was going to be since the summer. We've been on the topic of community for months, and I'm actually only just now seeing an uptick in the media. I don't know if it's because of the election or I don't really know what the cause is, but there in the last month, like let me say like late September to early October, there's been a huge uptick in discussion about community itself, which is really interesting. So it's cool to see for us as, content planners, we're already kind of a little bit ahead of the curve. We see where it's going, and then we're about to talk about it and jump in right when it's like still active. Because I think this episode is going to release the following week, so like the first week of November. And I think that's super cool because we're really connected and in with what's going on. It's relevant. And we're excited to give you guys what we think about the topic of community.
Yeah, and then also I think we're gonna be a little bit different than what you guys have experienced in our last first and second season. I think we really are challenging ourselves to be advocates of information and our real experiences that you guys can kind of relate to more in the moment and in your current day to day. I think is one of the things that I know that I wanted to bring to our team, our viewers, and our listeners. So. I think this episode was pretty much like, reaffirming community beyond the definition of proximity. Like what we have understood as what community is and what the actuality is. I know we've challenged each other to affirm and versus define what community means. So I know maybe we could put a little pop-up of like what the real definition of community is. But for me, the one that stuck out the most was a body or person's or notions having a common history or common social, economic, or political interest. I feel like, as you said, Sierra, we have a lot of that going on. So that's creating a lot of community action and activation. And I was like, well, this would be a great way for us to talk about what we think, felt, and have experienced then now of what we have assumed as community.
I think another interesting factor to get into is especially if you're going to bring in like the virtual factor versus just in person. I think the biggest, I don't want to say issue because that's not right. But when you're trying to talk about community, when we get bogged down in the different terms or definitions or how you want to see it, we also have to take into account the size. So
yeah,
the size of the community will definitely impact how we talk about it. I think obviously virtual communities have the potential to be much, much bigger because they're not restricted by whatever is around you. But then I think that there's also some like really, really, really amazing small communities. And my mom in New Mexico is a great example. She's got a close-knit community of people who are on the same rural road that's not funded by the county. They all have to maintain it themselves. It's a dirt road, and so everyone on that road loves each other and does all the things together, and they trade and they barter, and like that's a great example of a super tight knit rural community. And then you can juxtapose that against a super like mega crazy large online community. How does that? Those two things I
Yeah.
think have to be discussed very differently.
And I think, the funny thing is that I came across like this Instagram post because when it comes to what I think as far as like what we do here at Still is like we talk about how do you get yourself in those, or how do you begin or correct or course correct your already existing connections. And I know one thing that I notice is like if you're on this, like for me, as we all know, I'm always on a personal development, trying to improve my life, myself, and my existence. I saw this Instagram post that talked about like if you ever want to find highly motivated, functioning, active, accountable team members or mentors, go to the gym. You'll find that kind of tribe there. And I was like, I didn't think of that because when you think of like as a gay man, you're like, people don't go to the gym to find their tribe. They go there to sightsee and sweat. And I was like, but when you look at the characteristics of a person who's committed to working out, they're disciplined. They are, they have a lot of accountability and consistency around their behaviors. So like, if you want somebody who's going to be like a teammate or a mentor or an accountability buddy, usually the gym is that how gym dynamic is being like fitness and mental health are key things. So I was like, oh, okay. So I actually am gonna go back to my gym this week and just test the waters there and see what that's about. So yeah,
Well,
that's me. That's where I think that would.
that's actually like go back to season 2. Do you remember bringing that up in season 2? We talked about
I
how that was
do.
like, yeah, it's so good. And
I do.
actually, that dives into another very important factor I found when I was talking about community with other people before we started to do this episode. I wanted to make sure I had a good grip on what like sort of like a grassroots approach to people's ideas on community, right? And I think the best way to go about building community is exactly what you're saying, where you have you start with yourself, right? You start with the individual and you're like, okay, what do I want? What am I in search for? Where am I trying to go? What am I trying to do? And then you have to start doing actions that support that. And community actually I think is better achieved as a sort of like a perk, like a result, rather than like a overlying goal, if that makes sense. Like if you're looking for community, I feel like maybe that's not the right way to go at it. I think you should probably start it with yourself. Have like certain things that you're like aiming at and you want to do, put actions towards it, and then wherever you find yourself, was like, oh hey, look around, all these people are working towards the same thing I am. That's pretty cool. Maybe we can like, you know what I mean? I found that was like at the very, very bottom of what most people were talking about.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I feel like, and when we look at the again, like the definition of what a real community defines itself as, there's also this other one, a group of people with common characteristics and interests
Yes.
living together within a larger society. So like, think that's a perfect moment of being like, oh, like for me, one that used to, that I was like, oh, let's bring this to the table. It's like, there's this big reference to the LGBTQ community. And I'm like, are we weaponizing that word community in that specific niche of people? Like, is it really a community? Because now I'm seeing like last, June is Pride Month and things like that. And I'm like, there's Black Pride, Latino Pride. I'm like, but once upon a time, there were no variations. So it's like, is that a subcommittee? Is it really a community? Community, not a committee. Um, you know, so it made me start to challenge the ideas of what I associate community with versus identity. And that was kind of my experience.
I think that's fair. And actually, I stumbled upon the same thing. So I think the way that we sort of avoid hiding behind these labels of community, right, is we have to look at whatever community that we're proposing. It could be any community, and say, what goal are they working towards? What are they trying to bring? Like, what are they solving? What are they doing as a community? Like what exactly is your aim here? And I think if said community, whoever it is, whatever it is, doesn't actually seem to be going towards any one thing, and it's just sort of a conglomerate of people, I would I would argue I don't think that's the right term. It's probably not best called a community. I think it's probably better called I like identity does fit, but I don't think group identity is a good label. I would say it's a bunch of individuals who all sort of think the same way, and they're all kind of inhabiting the same space as far as sometimes physically, sometimes it's virtually. It could be a rally, it could be an online community group, but they're not really moving towards anything, you know? So I think community might not be the best word to describe those instances.
Well, you remember when we talked about trying to understand if social construct matches or is it play on when we were talking about like, niche, is that a committee? Is that a group? Is that really a community? Is it numbers? Is it notions? Is it, what is it? Because just like I talked about the LGBTQ, it's like that's identity. But when you look at social constructs talk about gender, race, economic status, all these things. And I was like, and even in that, I used to understand social construct as what now is defined as community. I used to think it was just like social construct was a group of like-minded individuals. I'm like, no, that's what really a community is. And social construct, the two dynamics of how I've been confusing them, as we all know, I'm the word jumbler, or the definition of use of words jumbler. That was how I said, oh, okay, huh. And what was really interesting, the social construct around how gender and sexual orientation apply to each other are not what you think. Like, technically, gender around social construct does not equal gender compatibility or gender identification as we think about it, masculine or feminine. It's crazy.
So for just for the sake of our viewers, I randomly pulled up, I'm using the Webster dictionary for this, just so that we're clear, because we're throwing a lot of terms out there. So like I said, Webster dictionary, a social construct is an idea that has been created and accepted by people in a society. And I would argue that society is a bigger term than community. So society would speak to a larger group of people, and there are communities within the society. So that would mean that a social contract is something that is widely accepted by people in general, which exactly is what you're talking about, the difference between what you thought, like, gender or whatever it might have been, like how that's expressed with regard to a social concept, and how it affects community. But go ahead, finish what you were saying just then.
Oh no, which throws me into my next question, because I think the only real experience that I could ever bring to this topic as of like, what have I walked through as far as my participation, engagement, exposure to both digital and live communities in like real time, or being on site within a community. And all I have is like either sports communities, like I was a part of a tennis club when I was in Chicago. And then as a professional, I'm a part of fashion and apparel communities. And even with my new career role, I'm now learning to be a part of personal development communities and coaching communities and, leader communities. So it's almost like I feel like in the professional world, they're so much more structured, where you literally have to be within that like-minded thought process to be considered a community member, versus someone who just like correlates with that idea. Like, oh, I like tennis, but I like pickleball better. Like they're like the sports people. I like pickleball. I've never.
I love
so I can't really say.
That was a great distinction to make. So saying that you just sort of have similar interests versus actually being held accountable to be doing actions that show that you support that's such a good. That was the other thing that I was getting at. But you had a question?
So So we all know that my girl Sierra has been in the military. She has served our country and served our country well. But would you even define that there are sub communities within like your experience when you were in the military?
Oh, 100%. Endless sub communities. And I would say that the sub communities that happen within the military very closely tie with the culture that you came from, because military is actually such a horrible example of that. I think horrible example in the sense that if you were going to let's disregard virtual communities just for a second. If you're going to talk about in-person physical communities, uh, the likelihood that all the people in that community came from the same general background, roughly speaking, for the most part, on average, is pretty high. But in the military, you get people, I've said this so many times, you get people from all walks of life, even different countries, because as long as you're a citizen, you can be part of the military. So I've even known, like, I went to school with a guy who used to be in the Italian army, and then he came over here, got a citizenship here, and joined our navy. And I'll tell you, like, the culture and the communities that he would probably find himself in would definitely be niche within the military as a whole, because people will gravitate towards what's familiar. And when you get a whole big diverse group of people on, let's just say, an aircraft carrier, for example, which is like a floating city that has on upwards of 3,000 people on it, uh, you can't get to know everybody on that boat. It's actually impossible. So the what people do is they gravitate towards what's familiar, and so you get tons of communities within the boat. And it's one of those things. It happens very naturally, and everyone kind of just melds into the norm, especially because you're in such an unfamiliar, tough, always changing environment. People have a high tendency to fall back into what's familiar any chance that they can, because everything else is so volatile. So it's a very the military is a very unique example of that, I think.
True. That's true. Do you want me to? I can move and we can reshoot or resegment the parts where I have stuff going on behind me
No,
because
it's fine.
I was like, I don't know. Oh, it's good. Okay, cool. All
And
right,
just for the
then
sake of
back.
editing, I'm gonna keep that in because that's real. We live our lives, right? I'm in my office.
Yeah, for
Brandon
sure.
in his beautiful place. I think it's a okay. We're gonna get back in the studio eventually, guys. We promise. But yeah,
Yeah,
so
like I was like,
it's all
um,
good.
uh, it's and the funny is, it's because like I was like, wow, when we talked about like when you were on when you were on military on the ship, you felt like there were so much things you lost when you got back to land, and I was like, there's that weird separation and disassociation around, like when COVID happened, and then you're like, I was on the water. I was not exposed to how digital communities advanced,
Yeah.
remote communities began, or were being built and being recalibrated to kind of support each other and create advocacy, even awareness. We all had to learn how to connect differently, communicate differently, and bring senses of community because of that, of those protective balances and awarenesses.
Yeah.
Um,
So
and that made me think about, oh yeah, go ahead.
real quick, just sorry, sometimes there's a lag when we talk, so I don't want to talk over you. But in case you guys weren't following from season one, season two, all these things, let me just put this in perspective. So I was on a destroyer, which is a 500-foot long ship with about 300 people on it max. And I deployed January of 20, or it might have been December, but I think it was January of 2020. And then I was on the water all through the extreme height of COVID, and we did not pull into land. So everything that took over the various parts of the world, and especially in the United States, all the different social protocols and the distance that happened with families and the tragedies and like just the monster of COVID. I didn't experience any of that the same way that everyone else did, and I didn't come back until October of 2020. And so the height of the craziness was quelled a little bit. At that point, everyone was on the same page about masking. Well, whether or not it was correct is whatever, but like everyone was on the country was on the same page ish as far as social protocols in public about masking, social distancing, and contacting other people. And so when I came back, it was like I came back to a country I didn't even recognize because none of that happened overseas when I was on the ship. Not in the same way that everyone else stateside experienced it, as well as all over the world. So it for me, it was like I came back to a different world altogether, and it was just kind of like a I don't want to say a slap in the face, but it was pretty interesting. It was very wild. So yeah, just as a preface.
And that brings me to this really interesting point, because I remember you talking about in your sub communities on the ship, people based on cultural and ethnical backgrounds and identifiers. That's how people kind of found their tribe or found their elements of thinking and connecting and staying, mentally active and, I don't know, just human interaction. That's just who we are as a society and as a species. Like we are not meant to be solitary creatures. We bond and we do better in connections and communities. So one of my questions that I had thought about that I wanted to bring to the table is like in the space of language rules and how we understand the world or understand even the world and community and niche of being in the military, and maybe even some of the language constraints that come, or even the ethical constraints or identities or whatever values that those people have individually that gravitate toward those little niches, which was the biggest thing that you saw was a non-negotiable to be a community participant, and which do you think was stupid as a requirement to be associated with the group or the tribe?
That was a really long question, and no offense, but I think our viewers would value it too. Can you put that a little bit more condensed? I lost you with some of it. Like, make that a
So,
shorter
for
question.
example, I remember us having talks in season 1 and 2 of
Yeah.
how you thought certain identifiers are just because I'm a woman, or just because I'm this tall, or just because I'm this level of ranking does not mean that I am not capable, confident, or comprehensive in this particular area of interest, concern, or
Okay.
association. You know what I mean? So
Following you.
in community, did you see a lot of that among the military, along your experience of being secluded but sequestered, but also subjected to specific categories of, you already had ranks, then you had disciplines, then you had departments, and then you had your actual role as a professional on those boats. So how did you manage all of that?
So I think that's a unintentionally very muddy way to look at it, unfortunately. Um, just because so here's the thing. There's communities on a ship and in the military in general that will transcend all of those things. So, but then there's also like sub communities within each one of those. So it's really tricky. With we to talk about community in the way that I think we're trying to speak about it on the podcast right now, I need to eliminate the community and the subculture of rank, and but also like it's that like military is actually such a bad example because it's so nuanced. Let's pick a different one because it's rough. It's actually really rough, and I want to make sure that our viewers understand this. So I can talk about the different like if I'm going to talk about the subculture of like the Filipino mafia community within the ship. I could speak to that, which we called it the Filipino mafia on the ship. That's a common everyone in the Navy knows what I'm talking about without having to even go into details on that. But like there's there's different things, right? So if we're gonna talk about you said like what were the obstacles that I saw coming into those communities, or like what?
Or better yet, based on the vibe of that thought process,
Yeah.
where have you experienced where you had immediate connection and symmetry with that group, or maybe even that community member to invite you within their group? And where did you say that is the stupidest requirement or expectation or member quality to associate as a community?
Yeah, I don't think that's even a thing. People that had similar
I
mindsets
guess
tend
maybe
to
in
stick
a commercial
together.
vein. sorry,
Say again,
not
sorry.
being that gays. I was like, gays don't suck, but like I feel like there's so much not vain, but so much social constructing labeling among
Mhm.
that community that's what creates so much of the divide.
Yeah, and I would argue um, that's sort of the outlier, not the rule, actually. So
Oh, okay, good. So even
if
even in this
we're
conversation, I'm like, it's all
yeah,
over.
I would
It's all
say
over.
it's sort of like a that's sort of a non-starter for me because honestly, when I looked around and I saw the different communities, let me just put it in like really simple terms, like all the rednecks on the ships. I know that's sort of like a whatever term, but when I say the word redneck, you know what I'm talking about, and it's not to be derogatory. It's to use a label
Right.
that people understand and resonate with. And everyone, you get people from everywhere all over in the United States. So all the people that were rednecks or whatever on the ship, it didn't matter what division you were in, it didn't matter what rank you were, it didn't matter what your purpose was on the ship. Those people would band together because if you took the ship aside, that's who you were when you joined and you walked on board, you know? And so
Mm-hmm.
those people gravitate because they speak the same way, they look the same way, they have the same interests. Like there's all these things that would connect you. And it wasn't about requirements. It was just sort of that's why I don't think community is the right word to say for the military. It would be camaraderie. That coming
Ah,
together, that morale, and that like that's the right word to use for the military because it's not about
and
community.
and
I
I
don't.
yeah, I agree with you now, and thank you for setting me
Yeah.
straight as far as how to paint and participate in that parallel. I think the other thing for me is like then in our thought process and as we talk about the defining and affirmations and what people have used to affirm themselves and say this is my community of
Can we talk about that?
personal development.
I want to talk
Huh?
about different. I want to talk about like you. We have that laid out, and that was such a contentious thing. We outlined viewers when Brandon and I outlined this episode, and we had a whole thing going as far as where we wanted the discussion to go and how we're going to try to facilitate our thoughts. One of the bullet points was
Yeah.
affirming versus defining community. And I had a lot of thoughts on this actually, and you just brought it up, and I think that's really interesting. So the word affirming, I'm not really sure if that even adds anything of value to the table when we're talking about community because the word affirm means just to like verify, like, yep, that's the thing.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? And I don't think that does community any justice because a community couldn't exist unless that was obviously the very first thing. A community exists around
Right.
certain ideas or principles or interests or something. And so to affirm a community is just the same as pointing to a lamp in the room and being like, lamp. You
Lamp.
know, I think that's kind of silly. I don't know if affirming community
Bird.
value sort of like,
Yeah.
or maybe you
Yeah.
would argue when people are affirming their community, it's like, oh, I'm part of this. This is my label. This is what it's sort of like a signaling, you know. I don't I don't think that
And
matters.
here's it doesn't. And here's the funny thing too. And again, I am chewing on the LGBTQ, because as a person who identifies as an LGBTQ person, and this may get us a lot of conversation starters or even feedback. But even as we've talked about sexual identity and non-gender identity, how that has now kind of broken up the participation and even like propaganda around that community because non-binary people like have a harder time aligning and connecting in a community of like-minded individuals because of how those mechanics are set up. And then it's like, are we creating these communities of opposition to where people have to survive in these outcasted groups instead of being a well diverse, inviting community? Because that binary person may have the same identities and interests and comparing you know connections with these communities that are very like, okay, it's only female or male, you know, generated communities, but I'm like, then are you really a community? Or like, because I know for still, at least for me, I'm like, if you're not all inclusive, you're not a community in my eyes.
Elaborate.
To a point.
Elaborate.
So like if you are if you are a community of women, but 90% of the women are only one ethnic background, then you are not a community of women. You are a community of a specific ethnic background of a woman, of like white women, black women, Latino women. If and that's where I feel like we get a weird confusion. Oh yeah, please call me because my thought
Okay.
process just got away from me.
Yeah, I did. So I this is a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I want to just nudge you on one thing. So you said
Yeah,
the community claims to be a community for women. I would
all
argue,
inclusive.
right, okay, but I would argue if that community so happened to only be, let's just say, white women or whatever, just for the, just put it out there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if that community is not enforcing any sort of rules or regulations that exclude other backgrounds, then I don't think it's a problem. And it's probably, I would, this is why I don't like the things that are limited to, well, that's not quite. So for that's probably not the right goal. Okay. What are all these women doing?
Right.
That's not the goal. What are they doing? What are they going after? What's their aim? And that's also going
Yeah.
to then set parameters for like who wants to join. So maybe I don't think female should be the only characteristic. I think it should be women aimed at whatever. We're gonna do like a
Oh,
network.
women
We're gonna
of
do
yeah,
business
women
owners.
of okay,
We're
yeah,
gonna do like there has to be a cause. And then if that group is imposing restrictions as far as who can show up, if those that's illegal. So I want to make sure that we're really very careful about our words there because you can't discriminate. It's illegal.
yeah.
Okay. So
The
let's
funny
go with
is
that.
I get so and what my thought process is and what my kind of like what my still segment of like activating our community and activating our listeners is being like, when was the last time you went to your community, your gatherings, your advocates, and you 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 provoked an element of change, or you brought an element that was within those confines or those rules or those
Yeah.
niches, but it was completely unexpected because of the social constructs around the belief of why your community exists. So, a perfect example: if I am a if I was to witness a group of women professionals in fashion, and one of the members was a transgendered woman, I would hope and pray that that community would be just as welcoming and forthcoming and inclusive to that identity based on what they now assumed were social constructs around. Well, aren't you LGBTQA? Well, this is a group of women professionals. They're a woman. Would they not be welcomed? And are we now weaponizing the identities around to create division and obstacle around what we should use the purpose of community building? I know. Did I just hit you on the head there?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of terminology flying around there very loosely. So,
Yeah.
okay. What rabbit hole do you want to go down here? Because there was like seven.
Well, because I think when we talk about how we said, like, first you deal with you. You like look at your conscious behaviors and your ethics and your your social justices and your commitments of like, this is who I am as a person, and I belong to this group. I belong to these communities and these networks. But do those networks sometimes make you alter your platform of individuality in support of those communities? So like I said, like if I was that was the example. Like if I was a
Okay.
witness to, yeah.
So I think the problem here is when we overgeneralize about a large community versus focusing in on a small individual example. So the one that you used, if a trans woman came into the fashion community, um, I don't really care about the trans woman part. I care about what that individual is trying to bring to the table. If you're joining a
Well,
community, that's like, why are you joining? What are you wanting to do? Who are you working with, collaborating with to work towards that goal? Like, what are these actions that are going to back up why you want to be here in the first place? And I think that's the right way to look at it, because if you come at it from any other angle, then it starts to get messy. And so let's briefly, can we talk about, this is what, like, echoing back to what I said in the beginning, it has to start with the individual, and community is not the overarching goal. I
I
think community
literally, okay,
is
yeah.
a result that happens and is fruitful and amazing and, like, love it. Like, that's amazing. That's how we get shit done, you know? But community should not be the first step. You know, the first step is with the individual, and always with the individual.
Um, I
What do you think?
agree with two thoughts. I agree with you, but I also think in the essence of like what this segment's about, it's like they've already done all that individuality work. So like they're walking in the door, they're walking in the cave of the community because they have already led themselves to say, I already know who I am. So now I'm going to go to the cave of the community. I'm just saying like, and I'm challenging and I'm also advocating for these things like in communities that I have seen, witnessed, and even heard about that are supposedly advocacies of this inclusivity and non-filtration of certain traits or prerequisites. If you're a woman, you're a woman. I could get, and you are a professional, that's it. There is no like, what are you trying to bring here? What do you stand for? No, you're a professional and you're a woman. You can come into this community and then bring all of those elements within that community. But the gate of that community is simple, woman, professional. But I've seen where a trans woman or a trans man or any person that is not script based on previous social construct understandings or lack of understandings have a harder time to sink into those realities. And that is where I challenge the idea of saying that is not to me a community of inclusivity or a community to begin with. Otherwise, you are pretty much a group of rigidity and specificity. And I don't think a community is based off of those type of topics or systems.
See, now I agree with you in the sense that that could be seen as unnecessarily discriminatory in nature when we're talking about things that aren't affected by sex. So, I mean, as long as, like, if we're talking about fashion, I keep in mind I come from a very
I mean,
fluid world all the time. I'm a martial artist. Sex matters.
yeah.
It matters
Mm-hmm.
immensely. Okay, so not, this is not to belittle. This is not to, you know what I mean. But like in fashion, I think, you know, if there are people who are discriminating in the case that you're making, then that's probably not right. But what about the idea of sports? You know, like,
I will
does the
then take you to, I'll use your
need
point.
to be, you know?
I'll use your point. Like you said, you're a martial artist.
Oh.
I don't need to know what degree of a martial artist, black, yellow, green belt. But if you are in a group of martial artists, are they going to stop you because you're a black belt? And they're like, no, you can't be in this group because you're a black belt. That's the type of thought process. Is like, would you still consider them a community?
Yes, they'd be a community of black belts.
Oh no, they would not let you in as a martial artist because you are a black belt martial artist. Now you have no idea what other group of martial artist statuses that are in there, but I've seen that where no, you can't be in our group. Why?
Here, I think that's sort of. I would say that's not a good faith argument. I would say it's not genuine. Not that you're being divisive on purpose. I would just say that I don't think that kind of discriminatory nature exists on average. On average.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So I would say
I
there's
don't think it's
always going to be
discriminatory.
outliers. There's always going to be
Mm-hmm.
outliers. There's always going to be rude people. There's always going to be toxic, unhealthy communities. Okay. But they are not the average. And so I don't believe in making rules for the exceptions and the outliers. You know what I
Um,
mean?
I
So
wouldn't
that,
say it's the exception. I guess what I did upon my journey of looking at this topic and as why we thought this would be a good platform to bring awareness to is that it is that I want to bring this awareness, this idea around as we generate and maybe reacclimate to being back into public spaces and in group settings. There's a lot of that traveling back from being in a distant digital distant environment where there was a lot of rigidity and the ability to be that rigid because of how expansive and detailed those remote and digital communities had to be. Hell, as just a single man, there were so many communities that I saw to like just connect with people in romantic interests. It's like Black for white men, and I'm like, okay, what the hell? Like, why are there so many sub communities around one community of interest? That's so separating. Well,
I would argue that speaks to a different problem, which, and you and I have gone back and forth over this quite a bit, especially in our, I think it was like for maybe our second season, but probably the first one. So in our first season, you talked at length about how you were sometimes you even favor some of these online or virtual friendships that you have. And it doesn't matter that you hadn't necessarily met that person. I just, as much like I respect you to make your own choices, and I'm not going to tell you stop being friends with that person because that's not my role here. But I would argue, I think the shift that to the virtual world that happened during COVID set us back as a species, and it's not the right model. And I think the more that we the more that we lean into this virtual model as I don't want to say like good or primary because that's not quite it, but we need to be more rooted in in-person group dynamics rather than virtual ones, because there's certain things that you can do in a virtual setting that are not appropriate in a in-person setting. And I think all those muscles got relaxed during COVID. We could do what we want, and we could do there was all these things that were allowed more so and encouraged in the virtual space, and we got shoved back into the physical one, and we had atrophied and we didn't know how to do these things anymore. And we need to get back to that, because the more healthy we can be in person, I think that will translate positively to the virtual space, but it does not go both ways.
I see. I totally see your point, and I confirm that path of parallel. What I'm also saying is that what that divided and what that time of the past did was created this I would say this virus or this cancer of consciousness around like that's now the new standard or setting of community. And I'm also just kind of advocating for people who are thinking about starting their own community groups and thinking about people who are wanting to connect more and bond and find other like-minded members. And this is also to a place where, people who are suffering from any type of ailment, mental or physical, professional or personal, when we think about trying to bring like-minded individuals together, I think it's so important that you think about value versus the version that you're looking to create. Because if, like, for instance, if the still community, and we're going to launch this at the end, but we're now on Reddit. We've just created our own digital opportunity to have community where we were going to really engage and start connecting with everybody. But my goal with us is to literally be just like we are here, non-script, non-judgmental, segmented. And I'm hoping that translates and invites and activates and inspires other people who are looking to create their own sense of connection and bond in the same way. So that way they attract people who maybe have worked on themselves at a certain percentage of fearless or courage or commitment to change. But sometimes they get thrown off or halted because they don't feel received, because wait, I identify as this, but this seems super specific to this type of person, and now I don't feel like I belong. Now I'm going to regress back into my distance permit behavior and not give myself this opportunity to grow and connect and be a part of like the social, the societal change of what it means to be in the room with people and bond with
Yeah.
other bodies in the space and minds versus just trusting my keyboard or my camera to give me purpose of connection. That's what I said. That was my whole platform.
No, 100%. I hear that absolutely, and it doesn't sound like we're in disagreement at all. To be honest with you,
No.
I think that to make it clear for the viewers what we're trying to say is that the more that we exercise those muscles as individuals to put ourselves out in the world, it will be better, and the helix moves upward. Just to put it simply, I think that pretty
Yeah,
much.
like I mean, yeah, like this is like I guess to use our power metaphors and at least my love of metaphors. As you're working these muscles, don't just get a big chest and skinny arms. Don't just work on a
Oh yeah,
big butt. No, like proportion your workout of those muscles, and don't discriminate on your muscle groups. Like, you know, every part of your system of this, at least what I feel and what I see to really unify the social constructs, to break some of the old ones, to rebuild some of the ones that are in need of repair, and the ones that are soon to be, brought to the world and society. This is what I think is going to be the best thing to make us as a species of societal connections and systems better, by saying we have so many forms of division out there. So when we have the opportunity to create a community, do not use that region of thought to create your community, and trust that you are going to change minds, including your own, in that thought process. That is what I think is my version of the new definition and affirmations of what community should be.
okay, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I circle back to some of the other things that we were talking about, or do you have other questions?
Yeah. Like, yeah. No, no, I no, I just think, I think it was really important for me this season to really put out the feelers and talk to those people who may be chewing on ideas and chewing on inspirations and maybe looking for maybe those swift kicks of confirmation and advocacy, saying it does matter. And we all believe that voice, communication, connection matter, but how you activate it and what some of those action items should look like and feel like, I wanted to really pull that into this season.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
So let me just think about this for a second. We might edit this out for dead air if you see it cut. Sorry, because this was
Yeah. No,
there's a lot of stuff in here. So we were talking about how digital spaces reshape community. Okay. So why don't we list out? This is interesting. So this is just you asking for your personal experience. What social constructs have you seen that directly affected people either trying to form community or trying to interact community to community? What social constructs have you noticed sort of provided some friction?
So as I had to look, the reason why we even picked Reddit was because of how I saw that exact thing happening. So I'm a big advocate around understanding the brain, the science of the mind, and the mentality of making mindful changes, growth, and determinations in your life to live a better system of who you are, what you are, why you are. And when it came down to it, when we talk about the idea of mental health and mental and diseases of the mind, or the brain diseases of the mind, I feel like I saw such a weird symmetry and sectional and divide and very, very small minded views and little pockets of people in those thought processes, when I'm like, well, why isn't just it about, you know, like people who are going through psychosis were not as rigid around people who were going through specific categories of like addiction or obsessions or other forms of non biological science behaviors. You know what I mean? And it was really interesting, huh? Like a perfect example is like the idea, like I guess I use like mental health and mental disease around addiction and recovery and behaviors because as a gay man I went through all of that kind of stuff. So what I had to see was like the difference of when a person who is trying to get care for recovery, whether it's alcohol or porn or bulimia, there are two channels that they have. Is one, you go to the ER and you get a psychological eval and then you get put into a psychological facility. Let's say in the world of a digital community, there's a psychological support for that particular mindset or mental blah. Then there's the actual facilities in which support only specifically to that affliction or effect or behavior. And then the science completely is gone. No real advocacy around the science and the bridge around your brain, the neuroplasticities, your serotonin, your oxytocin, like your all the research that backs it up.
Let
So
me see
those
if I can.
communities, yeah.
You're talking about how there seems to be a big gap and disconnect between when people are medicinally seeking care in a system versus what to do either after or when that is done. There's like a big everything else after that is sort of in the ether, and you're
I think
trying to
it's
learn.
yeah, it's
Is that
like that. But it's like the community of those medical people, the medical mindsets, and then the community now has been split because of the people of the behavioral mindset. And I'm like, in
that's not
that particular, that's not new, but I feel like that's what has created so many sprouts of all of that. Instead of there seeing, because like it was very hard for me to navigate what I wanted to feel, find, and sense of um, connection and not feeling alone. And it
yeah.
took such a long route, and I was very, very weary, and I felt even further, and it made me re-question where I stood as where did I really get it right? Did I really answer myself as to who I am? What all my individual, plateaus and indicators of my change to find my connections and my tribes, my communities, because of how intersecting, non-multidimensional it was until I had to go into subcommunity after subcommunity after subcommunity. But I'm like, you guys said you were advocates for recovery, or you said you were advocates for this, or you were the manifesting mentors, but it turns into a bunch of people who just are religious groups. I'm like, well, that isn't a form of manifestation. So that was where I was like, yeah, I've been affected by it, but that way, but it did challenge me to say I had to find multiple communities of one system to find my globe of.
Yeah. Well,
All
I would
right, now I got it
actually,
all.
I would argue. I mean, totally understand. I understand the frustration around time as far as how long that
Mm,
took. 100% hear that. But I think the result, the fact that you sort of rounded yourself out with multiple communities to figure out the issue, I actually think that's good.
mm,
But the thing here where I'll meet you halfway. So, where if we're going to talk about communities, especially when we're talking about something as closed and rigid as the medical community, right? Um,
mhm,
I think it makes sense that everything is narrow in the sense of treatment, in the sense of, uh, oh, geez, well, parameters, like the essence of the community itself. It makes sense that it's narrow. It should be narrow. However, I think that, and this is something that we see in the police force, in the military, and a lot of other things, just because the scope of the community is narrow doesn't mean they don't need to be aware of and well versed in uh, the other positive likely connections that could help, right? So we've seen a lot of let's see how I put this. So in the Navy, there's systems, right? There's systems in place. If because we're one of the rare places where you can sleep, eat, and work all in the same physical location. It's rough. You do life together and you work together. So the Navy is one of those places where we have a very large system to help you navigate sexual assault and sexual harassment and discrimination and all these different negative things that can impact an individual, right? So we have a system in place for that. And then as the Navy, they very intentionally select representatives for each one of those avenues. And then we make it known to the ship, or as a community, right? We make it known to the ship, hey, if you have this problem, talk to this person. They run this thing, they will help you. And I think that systemic branch, that spider, is not happening probably as much in the public workforce as it should. It's not being implemented as well as it should. Or in your case, like you were saying, like the medical community around it, like there's so much more improvement that could take place there. So when you were looking for those things and you found yourself in this narrow scope and you had to do all of the legwork to figure this stuff out for yourself, which is hard. 100%. I feel you. That's how the VA community is. The VA is garbage. And we can maybe speak more on that on a later date, but I think that there should be some more direct, clear, outlined paths that could be offered to you. It's like here's where you are right now as far as the medical community is concerned. Here's where we predict your next steps might be. Here's some avenues of help. Like, go do these things. And then each one of those should probably have their own, like, and I'm speaking with no experience in this area. So maybe you found that, or maybe you didn't. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I've not, again, like, not only did I find it, but I also, for me, I always think about ways to create, again, those channels of connection and cohesion to create a better sense of community and connection. So, like, I think again, I'm calling out to our community members and our community leaders, community admins and advocates to say, like, if you are in the science space of that community and you are in the and maybe the other community members, you're in the mental space and you're like, or you're in the understanding the body space of that same realm, connect, call to each other, because I swear, based on the work that I had to do to find all of you to create a globe, some people don't have that resilience, and I hope that in any of those avenues of people who want to be a better martial artist, people want to be a better runner, people want to be a better painter, there's all these divisions around those kind of creative, inspirative, active communities, and I think it is important to affirm yourselves definitively than just saying they'll find us. No, like, community is there to create advocacy and distribution to bring more connection to you. And I think as we kind of like wrap up, yeah, I think as we kind of wrap up this episode, I think it's really important of, like, don't be a compulsionary group, be a committed, clear group, and don't I hope, and my goal, even with our group and our attempt to build our own community and build a community of connection and conversation, is that no level or layering will be missed or guided. We're truly going to be organic operators around it, I think, and I hope we inspire people to become more organic in their operation around building, managing, advocating for their community. And I think that's the whole point of why I think this whole season that we're going to go into is all about beyond the definition and proximities that we understand communities in. And I think that's a great way for us to start re-evaluating and re-inspiring and invigorating that community commitment.
Absolutely. So I think that's a great place to end it without getting too much into our other episodes, like Brandon's saying. Just a little sneaky peek. I'm going to read them off for you. So we have One episode that's going to be looking into the paradox of loneliness that happens within communities, the toxic nature that can
Oh
kind
yeah,
of. What's up?
Yeah, sorry, I totally over you. Pandora's Paradox.
Yeah.
That was my favorite.
I know that's a good one. We have so much to say about that one. We're also going to be looking at counterfeit community identities, or communities that are sort of saying they're one thing, but are they actually? Which we hit real heavy on in the beginning of this episode. We're going to look into non-verbal communication strategies within communities, culture versus society. We're going to look at this. I'm actually really looking forward to this one. Basically, how to deal with disagreement and division within a community. Oh, I got so much to say.
Yes.
But there's this and like so much more in these upcoming episodes, everybody. So please tune in.
Yeah.
This was a really good overview. We touched on like every single episode in this one without even like doing that on purpose. So I'm excited. It's so fun.
Yeah. So again, follow us on our subscribe Instagram, Still Podcast, follow, and then Facebook, Small Talk is Lame or Still Podcast, and then our Reddit page, which is also now Still Podcast. We'll put links of all of those into the chat or into the intro to the video. But until then, we will see you guys. But we look forward to next episode being Pandora's Paradox. So until then, I'll see you guys later. Bye, Vera.